What does it mean to be seen, truly seen, by the people who raised you? At 32, I'm still unraveling that question, standing at the edge of a life I built against the current of my family's expectations. I'm Camilla, born into a traditional American family in Northern California where the air smells of eucalyptus and ambition. My parents, Arvind and Priya, had a script for me. Ace high school, attend Stanford or Berkeley, become a doctor or lawyer, marry young, and settle within 30 miles of their San Mateo home, close enough for them to drop by and critique my kitchen organization. I was their daughter, their legacy, meant to follow a path as predictable as the fog rolling over the bay. But I veered off that road at 21, and the map they drew for me has been burning ever since. My rebellion started with a single choice: design over medicine. I was in my junior year at UC Davis, staring at organic chemistry textbooks that felt like weights on my soul. I loved sketching, creating, and telling stories through color and form. So I switched my major, trading stethoscopes for sketch pads. My parents didn't yell. They sighed, which was worse. "Design is a hobby, Camila," my father said, his voice heavy with the disappointment of a man who'd built his life on certainty. "You'll regret this." That was strike one. Strike two came at 24, when I dropped out of grad school after landing a job with a global marketing firm in Berlin. To my parents, freelancing was code for unemployed, and remote consulting meant lounging in pajamas, wasting time on a laptop. Every phone call home felt like a deposition, their questions probing for cracks in my choices. Are you stable? Are you sure this is a career? The biggest strike, though, was Zaid. I met him 2 years ago, a pilot and aeronautics consultant who split his time between Sweden and Qatar. He was everything I wasn't supposed to want: worldly, unattached to any one place, with a life that unfolded across continents. We clicked over late-night conversations about art and ambition, his calm confidence balancing my restless energy. I waited nearly a year before telling my family, knowing they'd question him the way they questioned me. When I finally did, over a tense Zoom call, my mother's response was a knife wrapped in silk. "Why haven't we met him, Camilla? Are you sure he's real?" Her tone was half joking, but the doubt was sharp. My father just raised an eyebrow, as if I'd invented a fiancé to dodge their scrutiny. It stung, not because it was unexpected, but because they believed I was capable of lying about something so real. I'd always been private about my love life, especially after past relationships with men outside our community sparked raised eyebrows at family gatherings. I didn't introduce boyfriends unless I was serious, and with Zaid, I was. He wasn't just a partner. He was proof that I could choose my path and still land somewhere solid. But my parents' skepticism turned him into a ghost, a story they whispered about behind my back. I heard the murmurs at holidays, the aunts who asked, "Still no ring?" with pitying smiles. I learned to smile back, to deflect, but each jab chipped away at something inside me. Last December, the tension crystallized. My cousin Dia, 29 and glowing with the ease of someone who'd followed the family playbook, was getting engaged. Her fiancé, Armin, was a cardiac surgeon, Ivy League educated, the kind of man who checked every box on the perfect son-in-law list. The engagement party was set to be a spectacle, a 3-day affair at a San Jose banquet hall, complete with catered buffets and choreographed dances. I wasn't surprised to get an invite, but the postscript from my mother, scrawled on the card, hit like a dart. "Hope your fiancé can make it this time." Smiley face. The words were light, but the subtext was heavy. They didn't believe Zaid existed, and they didn't believe in me. Zaid and I had already planned to be in the US for the holidays, landing at SFO from Dubai 2 days before the event. He had meetings in Palo Alto, and we were squeezing in visits with my friends in LA. The catch was his schedule. A last-minute meeting meant he'd join me at the party later, by dinner. To complicate things, he was borrowing a friend's helicopter for travel, a practical choice to dodge Bay Area traffic, but one that felt absurdly extravagant when I thought about explaining it to my family. As I packed my wine-colored silk dress and gold jewelry, I felt the weight of their doubt pressing down. This wasn't just a party, it was a stage, and I was walking onto it alone, carrying a truth no one believed. The banquet hall in San Jose glittered like a promise, its chandeliers casting golden light over tables draped in ivory linen. I stepped inside, my heels clicking against the marble floor, and felt the familiar hum of a family event. Laughter, clinking glasses, the faint strum of a sitar weaving through the air. Dia's engagement party was a triumph of excess. Henna stations in one corner, a dessert bar with gold-dusted pastries in another, and a crowd of relatives who seemed to multiply with every step I took. At 32, I should have been used to these gatherings, but tonight felt different. I was Camilla, the outlier, the daughter who'd strayed too far from the script, and every glance reminded me of it. I smoothed my silk dress, took a deep breath, and braced for the scrutiny I knew was coming. The whispers started almost immediately. As I wove through the crowd, an auntie in a sparkling sari caught my arm. "Camila, where's your fiancé? Still in... what's it called, Doha?" Her smile was syrupy, her eyes sharp. I nodded, forcing a laugh. "Dubai. He's tied up with work." Another uncle, holding a whiskey tumbler, chimed in, "You're such a free spirit, Camilla. Ever think about settling down closer to home?" The question wasn't new, but it landed like a pebble in a still pond, rippling through me. I murmured something vague about loving my life abroad and moved on, my smile a shield. By the time I reached Dia, radiant in a teal lehenga, I was already exhausted. She hugged me tightly, her warmth a brief reprieve. "You look stunning," she said, and I believed her. But even Dia's kindness couldn't drown out the undercurrent of judgment. I tried to focus on the moment, taking selfies with Dia, admiring the floral arches, and sipping sparkling water to steady my nerves. But then I heard it, a laugh that cut through the chatter like a blade. My mother stood at a cocktail table near the bar, surrounded by her sister, Dia's mom, and a cluster of aunties. "I've stopped asking," she said, her voice carrying just enough for me to catch. "Camilla says he's in aviation." I said, "What does that even mean? Is he a flight attendant?" The group erupted in laughter, not subtle chuckles, but big, open-mouthed cackles, as if my life was a punchline. "I told Arvand," she continued, "maybe he's imaginary." My hand tightened around my glass, the bubbles fizzing against my fingers. I should have walked away, but I stood frozen, letting their words wash over me like a tide. My father, standing nearby, didn't laugh, but his silence was worse, an agreement by omission. I wanted to scream, to tell them Zaid was real, that he was meeting me here tonight, that he'd flown us from Dubai in a life they couldn't imagine. But words felt useless against their certainty. Instead, I turned away, my heart pounding, and found a quiet corner near the dessert table. Dia caught my eye from across the room, her expression softening as if she sensed my hurt. I forced a smile, determined to stay for her. This was her night, and I wouldn't let my family's doubts ruin it. But the weight of their laughter clung to me, heavy as the humid Bay Area air. As dinner ended, the planner called for toasts, a parade of speeches from Dia's friends, Armin's cousins, even my younger brother Neil, whom I hadn't spoken to in months. Neil stood, smug in his tailored blazer, and spoke about finding the one, his words polished but hollow. The crowd clapped, and then the planner handed me the microphone. I hadn't prepared, hadn't expected to speak, but all eyes turned to me. I stood, my wine-colored dress catching the light, my gold earrings glinting as I moved. The room was a sea of faces, some curious, some skeptical, most waiting for me to falter. I gripped the mic, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "I'll keep it short," I said, scanning the crowd. "Watching Dia and Armin tonight, it's beautiful. It's rare to see two people so supported, so celebrated, so believed in." I paused, letting the words hang. "Not everyone gets that, so if you do, hold on to it." The room offered polite applause, a smattering of claps that felt like pity. I handed the mic back and sat, my heart still racing. My mother's eyes met mine briefly, her half-smirk unchanged, as if my words were just another performance. I looked away, focusing on the tablecloth, the candlelight, anything to anchor me. I'd said what I needed to, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. The murmurs resumed, the party swelling around me. I checked my phone, hoping for a text from Zaid, but the screen was blank. He'd promised to be here by dinner, but his meeting had run late, and the helicopter plan, practical but absurd, made timing tricky. I pictured him landing somewhere nearby, his windswept hair an easy grin, and held on to that image like a lifeline. The night wasn't over. I just had to wait, to endure the glances and the whispers a little longer. But as the music shifted to a slower beat and the crowd began to mingle again, I felt the weight of their doubt pressing harder. I was still alone, still the daughter they didn't believe in, and the clock was ticking. A faint thrum broke through the clatter of dessert plates and laughter, like a pulse in the distance. At first, I thought it was my imagination, a trick of nerves frayed by the night's scrutiny, but the sound grew louder, unmistakable, a mechanical heartbeat cutting through the San Jose banquet hall's glow. Heads turned, murmurs rippled, and I felt a spark of certainty ignite in my chest. Zaid was here. The helicopter's rotors were no longer a promise but a reality, and as the crowd stirred, I stood rooted, my sparkling water trembling in my hand. This was the moment I'd been holding my breath for, the pivot where doubt would meet truth. The planner rushed to the glass doors, her clipboard forgotten, as guests craned their necks toward the windows. Daya, radiant beside Armin, shot me a puzzled glance, her lehenga shimmering under the chandeliers. Then the doors swung open, and there he was, Zaid striding in with the ease of someone who belonged everywhere. His navy suit hugged his frame, tie absent, his watch catching the light as his windswept hair hinted at the journey he'd just made. "Sorry I'm late," he said, his grin disarming the room. "Had to park the helicopter." A gasp, sharp, involuntary, came from someone nearby, maybe an auntie clutching her sari. The absurdity of his entrance, practical yet theatrical, hung in the air like a spell. He crossed the room to me, his eyes locking onto mine, and kissed my forehead, a gesture so tender it silenced the chaos in my head. "Did I miss your toast?" he asked softly, his voice steady despite the eyes boring into us. "No," I said, my lips curving into a smile I couldn't suppress. "You're right on time." The room shifted in that moment, the weight of 100 skeptical glances lifting. I didn't need to look around to feel it. The air no longer carried the sting of pity or judgment. Curiosity replaced doubt, and for the first time that night I stood taller, my silk dress no longer a shield, but a statement. Zaid turned to the nearest table, where my mother stood, her dupatta clutched tightly in her hands. "Priya, it's wonderful to finally meet you," he said, extending a hand with warmth that felt effortless. Her mouth parted, a flicker of disbelief crossing her face before she took his hand, her grip hesitant. "Oh yes, of course," she managed, her voice the same clipped tone she used for neighbors she tolerated but didn't trust. My father, a few steps behind, met Zaid's handshake with a nod. "Arvand," Zaid said, unfazed, "I've heard so much about you." My father's jaw tightened, his eyes assessing Zaid like a rival in a boardroom, but he said nothing, only nodded back. The crowd buzzed, relatives leaning closer, their whispers now tinged with intrigue. "Aviation, you say?" an uncle asked, his whiskey tumbler forgotten. Zaid nodded, casual but commanding. "Mostly consulting now. Projects in Europe, the Gulf. I still fly when I can. Keeps me grounded, ironically." A few laughs broke the tension, not because the line was clever, but because the room was recalibrating. I wasn't the delusional daughter anymore, the one who'd spun a fiancé from thin air. I was Camilla, whose partner had descended from the sky, rewriting the narrative they'd crafted about me. I stood beside Zaid, my hand brushing his, and felt the storm inside me quiet. This wasn't just about the helicopter, though its roar still echoed in my mind. It was about presence, about showing up in a way no one could ignore. As Zaid fielded questions from a curious cousin, I caught Dia's eye. She winked, her smile a silent cheer. The night wasn't mine to steal, but I'd claimed a piece of it, and that was enough. For now, I let the moment carry me, knowing the real work of facing my family's recalibration lay ahead. The chandeliers still glittered, but the light felt different now, sharper, as if the room had tilted on its axis. Zaid's arrival had cracked the facade of the engagement party, and I stood in the aftermath, watching my family scramble to adjust. At 32, I'd spent years bracing for their judgment, but tonight, I was the one holding the reins. The crowd's curiosity buzzed around us, relatives circling Zaid like moths to a flame, their questions about his work laced with awe. I stayed close, my wine-colored dress catching the light, my heart steady but alert. This wasn't the end of the storm. It was the eye, calm but fleeting, and I needed to navigate what came next. My aunt, Dia's mom, stood frozen near the bar, her sari glinting as she struggled to rearrange her expression. She'd laughed the loudest at my mother's imaginary fiancé jab, but now her eyes darted between Zaid and me, searching for a script she hadn't rehearsed. My mother, meanwhile, fidgeted with her dupatta, her half-smirk replaced by a nervous twitch. When Zaid greeted her, she'd managed civility, but I saw the cracks, her hands twisting the fabric, her gaze flickering to the floor. My father was smoother, his handshake firm, but I caught the tension in his jaw, the way he sized Zaid up like a deal he hadn't vetted. They weren't ready for this, for him, for me. Zaid, oblivious to their unease, charmed a group of second cousins with a story about a project in Qatar. "It's less glamorous than it sounds," he said, his laugh easy. "Mostly spreadsheets and jet lag." The cousins nodded, captivated, their earlier skepticism forgotten. I watched, a quiet pride swelling in my chest. He didn't need to prove himself, but his presence did it anyway, rewriting the story they'd told about me. Yet I knew this wasn't a resolution. It was a shift, and the real test was how my family would respond when the spotlight dimmed. Neil, my younger brother, approached during dessert, his blazer still crisp from his smug toast earlier. "So that's your guy?" he said, nodding toward Zaid, who was now chatting with an uncle about aviation logistics. I met Neil's gaze, tired but unwilling to let the moment slip. "Yeah, that's Zaid," I said, my voice even. He gave a short laugh, his eyes flicking to Zaid's circle. Didn't think he was real, to be honest. The admission hung between us, blunt and unapologetic. I could have pressed him, demanded more, but I didn't. "Yeah," I said, turning away. A lot of people didn't. I walked toward Dia, leaving Neil to stew in his half-apology. I wasn't here to fix him, not tonight. Dia was near the dance floor, her lehenga catching the light as she swayed with Armin. She spotted me and broke away, squeezing my hand. "Best moment of the night," she whispered, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "I wasn't trying to upstage you," I said genuinely. She laughed softly. "You didn't. You just reclaimed your place, and it was about damn time." Her words landed like a balm, reminding me why I loved her. Dia had always been my ally, her rebellion quieter than mine, but no less real. We stood together, watching the crowd, and for a moment, I felt anchored. Later, my mother pulled me aside near the staircase to the valet area, her expression a mix of curiosity and unease. "Why didn't you tell us he was coming?" she asked, her voice low. I shrugged, my arms crossed. Would it have changed anything? She hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of her dupatta. "I just didn't realize," she said. "What didn't you realize?" I pressed, my tone calm but unyielding. She looked down, then back at me. "I didn't realize he was this serious." The words were clumsy, but they carried the weight of every unspoken doubt, every moment she'd dismissed my life as a phase. "I'm glad you came," she added after a beat. "Me too," I said. And I meant it, not for her, but for me. Zaid found me later on the rooftop garden, a quiet oasis above the banquet hall's chaos. The Bay Area skyline glittered in the distance, the air cool against my skin. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. "How'd it go?" he asked, his voice a steady anchor. I smiled, watching the city lights. "Better than I expected," I said. "Worse than it should have had to be." He didn't reply immediately, just held me closer. "They'll catch up," he said finally. "I'm not waiting," I replied, my voice firm. "I know," he said, and we stood there, the music below fading into a softer rhythm. The night had shifted something fundamental, not just in my family's eyes, but in mine. I wasn't invisible anymore. Not to them, and not to myself. The rooftop garden's quiet lingered in my mind as Zaid and I left the San Jose banquet hall, the city's haze blurring the stars above. At 32, I'd walked into that party expecting a battlefield, but I'd emerged with something else, a flicker of clarity, a sense that I'd finally been seen. The drive back to our hotel was silent, not heavy but peaceful, Zaid's hand resting on mine as the Bay Area's lights streaked past. Yet, as we settled into the rhythm of the days that followed, I felt the weight of what hadn't been said, the gaps my family still hadn't bridged. Their doubt had cracked, but reconciliation wasn't a single night's work. It was a slow, uneven dance, and I was learning the steps. Back in California, the shift began in fragments. My father, always more reserved than my mother, sent me a text a few days later, a link to a Forbes article about urban development. Reminds me of one of your projects. Interesting read. I stared at the message, the cursor blinking in my reply box. It wasn't an apology, but it was an olive branch, the first time he'd acknowledged my work without a caveat. I typed a quick thanks, I'll check it out, and left it at that, unwilling to overplay the moment. Then came my mother's move, subtle but loud in its way. In our family group chat, she posted a photo from the engagement party. Zaid and I near the stage, his arm around me, both of us smiling. "Look who finally made it into the family album," she captioned it. I zoomed in, tracing the image. It was the first time she'd publicly claimed him, claimed us. Even my aunt, Dia's mom, who'd cackled at the imaginary fiancé joke, reached out. A Facebook friend request popped up, followed by likes on my old travel photos, Jordan's red sands, Croatia's turquoise coast. I didn't accept the request, not yet, but I noted it. A small concession from someone who'd never bothered before. Neil, my brother, was the boldest. His text came late one night. "Hey, sorry if I've been a jerk." That was impressive. I read it twice, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. "Not sure if that's an apology or a TED Talk intro," I replied. "Let's go with both," he shot back. I didn't respond, but I saved the message, letting his sarcasm soften into something like sincerity. These gestures weren't grand, but they were cracks in the wall, and I felt them widening. A week later, I visited my childhood home in San Mateo to pick up a box my mother had insisted I take. Jewelry from my grandmother, a shawl, a pressure cooker she swore was too precious to ship. Zaid waited in the car, scrolling on his phone, giving me space. Inside, the house smelled of incense and coriander, the hallway lined with framed photos. I stopped at a new one, Zaid and I at the party, our smiles bright against the banquet hall's glow. "Did you print this?" I asked as my mother appeared, her sari rustling. She glanced at the frame, then at me. "Dia emailed it. I liked it. It's a nice picture." Her voice was soft, almost cautious. I nodded. "It is." She adjusted a vase on the console table, though it didn't need adjusting. "I may have misjudged," she said finally, the words heavy with effort. "He seems thoughtful." I stood still, weighing her admission. It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was the closest we'd come. "I never needed you to be impressed," I said, my voice steady. "I just needed you to stop assuming I was lying." She didn't argue, a rare silence settling between us. "You've always done things differently," she said. "That's hard for us, but maybe different doesn't mean wrong." I took the box, hugged her briefly, and left before we could overcomplicate it. In the car, Zaid glanced at me. "You okay?" I nodded. "Yeah." He didn't push, and I loved him for it. His silence was a kind of peace I'd learned to cherish. We flew back to Dubai days later, the warm, dry air greeting us like an old friend. The city's pulse, Arabic and English blending, skyscrapers glinting against the desert, felt like home in a way San Mateo never had. Our life resumed. Late dinners on the balcony, weekends at the marina, flights to meetings in Riyadh or Paris. I was Camila again, unapologetic, untethered, but something lingered, not anger or need for approval, but an itch for closure. My family's small steps were real, but they hadn't seen the full scope of what I'd built. I wanted them to witness it, not to validate me, but to understand what their doubt had cost. The Dubai skyline sparkled beyond the summit's glass walls. A a constellation of ambition that mirrored my own. At 32, I stood on a stage I'd earned, my white tailored pantsuit sharp against the spotlight, my voice steady as I addressed a room of entrepreneurs and executives. Months after Dia's engagement party, Zaid and I had been invited to this high-profile business summit. He to speak on aviation logistics, me to be honored for my branding consultancy's seven-figure milestone. I'd invited my parents with a handwritten note. You once asked if I was serious about my life. I'd like to show you what serious looks like. Now, they sat in the front row, their faces a mix of awe and unease, witnessing the woman I'd become. I'd asked to speak on resilience, and as I told my story, not the family drama, but the rejection, the audacity to build my table when no one offered me a seat, I felt the room lean in. Success isn't about approval, I said, my eyes grazing my parents. It's about believing in your work when no one else does. My mother's eyes glistened. My father clapped a beat longer than the rest, and I knew they saw me, not as their wayward daughter, but as Camilla, undeniable. Offstage, congratulations poured in. Investors, a minor royal, a tech mogul, while my father shook hands like he was at his conference. At dinner, my mother turned to Zaid, her voice soft. Thank you for standing beside her, for believing in her when we didn't. Zaid smiled, polite but firm, offering no absolution. Later, on our apartment's balcony overlooking the Palm, my father pulled me aside. You've done well, he said, his voice low. I didn't see it before, but you've built something. I met his gaze, the man who'd once called design a hobby. I know, I said. He nodded, then added, I'm proud of you. At 32, I didn't need those words, but they landed like a gift I hadn't expected. The revenge wasn't the applause or the view from my sleek apartment. It was growing into someone they never imagined, then giving them a front row seat to watch. As they left for California, I felt lighter, not because they'd changed, but because I had. Zaid joined me on the balcony, the desert air warm against our skin. Worth it? He asked. I smiled, the city's pulse echoing my own. Every second. We stood there, the future unwritten, but mine to shape. What would you do if you woke up one morning only to discover that everything you've spent the last 15 years building, your reputation, your career, your most prized accomplishments, was about to be ripped away from you in an instant? That's exactly what happened to me, Luna Davis. 15 years at SkyTech Innovations, a company I had helped shape from the ground up, and yet I was the one being tossed aside as if I were nothing more than a footnote in its success story. It was the day they told me my position was being eliminated, the day they said they no longer needed someone like me, someone who had spent her career nurturing innovation. It wasn't a surprise, not really. The signs had been there for weeks, maybe months. As I sat there across from Samantha Riley and Claire, both of them with carefully neutral expressions, I felt something else. It wasn't shock or rage, it was calm. A quiet resignation mixed with a strange sense of clarity. I'd known it was coming, even before the email thread had found its way into my inbox by mistake. My algorithm, the one that powered AccountSphere, their flagship product? It had always been mine, despite what they thought. And when the restructuring announcement came, I didn't flinch. Samantha slid the severance package across the table. 2 weeks for every year of service, health benefits for 3 months, career counseling that I would never use, and I accepted it without a second thought. The words they expected to hear, the protests they thought they would get from a woman in her mid-50s, one who'd given everything to a company that now saw her as disposable. They didn't come. Instead, I nodded and smiled politely. I understand, I said. I knew what was happening long before they ever did. What they didn't understand, though, was that they'd made a mistake. One that would soon unravel everything they'd worked for. As I walked back to my office, the weight of the moment settled in, but I wasn't thinking about my severance or the corporate politics at play. I was thinking about the message I'd sent just minutes before, the one to Gregory Sullivan, CEO of Precision Tech. The message signaled the beginning of my next chapter. I walked through the halls of SkyTech Innovations with a calmness that seemed to unsettle the few who crossed my path. The administrative assistants offered me sympathetic glances. some murmuring their goodbyes as I passed. I had always been a presence in these halls, a constant figure, and now, just like that, I was gone. They couldn't see it yet, but they would soon enough. My departure was just the beginning. The CEO, Caleb Johnson, and his executive team were no doubt already trying to figure out how to move forward without the algorithm that made their flagship product the market leader. My algorithm. Their product. It was almost too perfect, the irony of it all. As I passed by the glass-walled conference room, I could see Caleb on the other side, talking animatedly to his team about quarterly projections. The same man who had presented my work as if it were his own at last year's industry conference. The same man who had stolen the credit, always deflecting the spotlight away from me. I stopped for a moment, watching him, but it wasn't bitterness I felt. It was something deeper, a quiet sense of determination. They didn't understand me, but I understood them. I understood their arrogance. I understood their underestimation of me. Back at my desk, I packed up the few personal items I'd accumulated over the years: conference badges, a coffee mug my team had gifted me last Christmas, framed family photos, and set them carefully into a cardboard box. As I did, I thought about the last time I'd been in this office, how everything felt different now, as if I were a stranger walking through my own life. Then it hit me. This was the moment of change, the moment where I could take control of everything they had overlooked. I opened my drawer and pulled out the folder containing the severance agreement, as well as the internal documentation I had quietly filed away in the months prior. I had seen the writing on the wall, and I had been ready. When the email about restructuring came, I had already begun my research. I had discovered something critical. Skytech had failed to file a patent for my algorithm. Their oversight, their mistake. I hadn't raised an alarm at the time. I had simply kept working, documenting every step of my development. But now, as I packed my things, I knew my next move was already in motion. I had filed the patent on my own, and the rights to the distributed processing algorithm are now in my name. They would never have the luxury of claiming it. As I packed the final item, a small award I had received for the algorithm, I heard a soft knock at the door. Samantha Riley stood in the doorway, her expression neutral, but I could see the faint tension in her posture. "Just checking that everything's for your departure," she said, her voice strained with false politeness. She had no idea what was coming. I smiled and nodded. "Crystal clear," I replied, placing the award carefully into the box. I didn't let her see the small smile that tugged at my lips. "Will you be taking some time off?" she asked, a forced note of concern in her voice. I knew the question was coming from a place of politeness, but I couldn't help but smile at the irony of it all. "Actually," I said, standing and meeting her gaze, "I already have something lined up. I start Monday." Her eyebrows lifted in surprise. "That's fast. Anything interesting?" I paused, savoring the moment just a little longer. "A leadership position. I'm quite excited about it." She nodded absently, clearly eager to move on to the next task at hand. "Good luck with that," she said quickly before turning to leave. I watched her go, then closed the door behind her. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to pause and take it all in. The years of hard work, the years of being overlooked, the years of being told I should be grateful just to have a seat at the table. And now, in one final act, I was walking away with everything they had tried to erase. As I left the building for the last time, my keycard surrendered, and with my box of personal belongings in hand, I glanced back at the glass facade of Skytech Innovations. On the top floor, I could see the executive conference room, still brightly lit. The irony wasn't lost on me. Less than 72 hours from now, that same room would be in full crisis mode, and I'd be on the other side, watching it all unfold. As I stepped into the waiting car, my phone buzzed. A simple text from Gregory Sullivan. "It's happening. Let's meet tonight. Part 3. Rising Action. Preparation for the next move." The dinner with Gregory Sullivan at Meridian, the upscale restaurant tucked away from the noise of the city, felt almost surreal. It was an intimate setting, quiet, private, perfect for the conversation we were about to have. We sat in a secluded alcove, surrounded by the soft glow of Japanese screens and the hum of a distant waiter's footsteps. Gregory, always the professional, had already ordered for us, but his mind was elsewhere, his eyes scanning the quiet room, aware of the subtle tension building between us. When the waiter left, he leaned forward, his voice low but charged with a quiet excitement. "They did it," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "I suspected they might, but to cut the very person who developed their core technology. Victor never understood what you created." I nodded, taking a sip of water. I had heard all of this before. Gregory had his doubts about Skytech's leadership, but now it was all playing out exactly as I had anticipated. He saw the implementation, the user interface, the marketing potential, I replied. But the underlying architecture? That was just tech stuff to him. That was my work. I smiled at the irony of it all. A few months ago, I had discovered something that could change everything. Skytech had failed to file a patent for my distributed processing algorithm. Their legal team, who had promised to take care of it, had overlooked it. When I found out, I didn't make a fuss. I didn't raise alarms. Instead, I quietly made my plans. I had begun working on refinements to the algorithm, using my equipment and my own time, improvements that boosted efficiency by 43%. The paperwork was straightforward. I filed for the patent under my name, and because I had taken the necessary precautions, documenting everything meticulously, I knew my claim was ironclad. No one could argue it now. Gregory slid a folder across the table, interrupting my thoughts. He smiled as he did, the kind of smile you give when you know you've just sealed someone's fate. "All the legal documents are ready. Once you sign, Precision Tech officially acquires exclusive licensing rights to your algorithm." I glanced down at the folder, my mind running through the implications. A 7-figure signing bonus, equity in Precision Tech, royalties from every product using my algorithm. It was everything I had worked for, everything I had built, now in my control. I opened the folder slowly, absorbing the terms, but I had already memorized them. I had known this day would come, and I had prepared for it. "What do you think Victor's face will look like when he realizes what's happened?" Gregory asked, the satisfaction in his voice barely contained. I chuckled softly. "I'm more concerned about my team," I said, glancing up at him. "They don't deserve to be caught in the fallout." Gregory raised his glass, his eyes gleaming with approval. "Don't worry about them. We have positions for all 6 of them, senior roles and significant raises. If they're interested, they'll be welcome here." I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. I signed the final page, sealing my future. With one move, I had protected my team, secured my place in the industry, and delivered a blow to Skytech that would make their failure undeniable. Gregory's eyes lit up as he looked at me. "To new beginnings." He raised his glass, and I clinked mine against his. I felt the weight of the decision settle around me, but there was no fear, no doubt, just the anticipation of what was to come. The next few days passed in a blur. There were exit interviews, knowledge transfer meetings, and goodbyes to colleagues who had no idea what was going on behind the scenes. I maintained my professional composure, but inside I was already thinking about the future. I documented every project, every password, and every process. I wanted to leave nothing behind that could be used against me. I wasn't being kind. I was leaving evidence of my good faith while knowing full well that Skytech would soon find out just how valuable I had been to their operations. As the final day at Skytech loomed closer, I found myself growing more detached from the company I had once given so much. During my last exit interview, Claire from HR went through the standard checklist with robotic efficiency. "You understand that any intellectual property developed during your employment remains the property of Skytech?" she asked, her eyes barely meeting mine. I smiled politely. "Anything developed within the scope of my employment, using company resources and company time," I emphasized, the slight edge to my voice making it clear that I wasn't going to let anyone twist the truth. "But the patent is mine." Claire didn't seem to catch the subtlety in my response as she pushed the non-disclosure agreement across the table. Of course. She didn't press further. It was too late for them to do anything about it. I finished packing my items, the last one being a small memento from my team, a token of their appreciation for the work we had done together. The door to my office closed behind me for the last time, and as I made my way to the elevator, I paused for a moment, and looked back at the sleek glass building where it all began. I had built something here. I had made a difference. But it wasn't about nostalgia. It wasn't about the people I had left behind. It was about what was coming next. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside, ready for what was to come. By the time the press release went live, I had already settled into my new role at Precision Tech. The contract was signed, the paperwork was filed, and the first step of my new journey had begun. But as I sat at my new desk, the hum of the office around me felt almost surreal. A corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows, a team of engineers eager to work with me, and the knowledge that everything I had worked for, everything I had built, was finally mine to shape. The real impact, though, was still unfolding. SkyTech Innovations had no idea what was about to hit them. At exactly 7 a.m., my phone buzzed with a message from Gregory Sullivan. "Press release is live. Industry news will be picking it up soon." I smiled and opened the company's internal communications tool, where I saw the announcement, beautifully worded. Precision Tech acquires exclusive rights to revolutionary distributed processing algorithm. Welcomes creator Luna Davis as Chief Innovation Officer. The article not only announced the acquisition, but also emphasized my role as the sole inventor of the technology, something that SkyTech had failed to do despite my central role in the creation of their flagship product, AccountSphere. It wasn't just about the algorithm anymore, it was about control. And now, I held all the cards. By 9:15 a.m., I was deep in a meeting with my new team, discussing the next phase of development. Precision Tech was eager to refine the algorithm further, and early tests were showing a 51% performance boost, better than even I had projected. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that my vision was being fully realized, without the constraints of SkyTech's corporate bureaucracy. Here, my ideas were heard. Here, I was seen. As we delved deeper into the data, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Miguel, one of my trusted engineers from SkyTech, who had also followed me to Precision Tech. His message was simple, but the chaos it described was palpable. Complete chaos here. What did you do? I quickly responded, check your email. All 6 of you have offers waiting. The message, of course, referred to the 6 engineers I had mentored at SkyTech, each one now being offered a senior role at Precision Tech. It was my way of ensuring they didn't suffer from the fallout of my departure. As they readied to leave SkyTech, their knowledge and expertise, my expertise, would go with them. The strength of my team would be their downfall. Meanwhile, across town at SkyTech's headquarters, things were beginning to unravel quickly. By 9:30 a.m., the usual Monday morning executive meeting was no longer routine. I could almost hear the panic from here as Victor Lawson, SkyTech's CEO, had to face the reality of losing the core technology that powered their product. Miguel's updates came in fast and furious, painting a vivid picture of the scene unfolding inside the glass-walled conference room at SkyTech. Victor was pacing back and forth, demanding explanations from the legal team. "How could we have missed this?" he was shouting. "Where's the patent? Who's responsible for this?" The legal team scrambled, pulling up every file and document they could find related to my work. It didn't take long for them to realize that the patent was not in SkyTech's name, something they had never bothered to correct despite my repeated inquiries. And now, in an instant, they were left with a situation that could not be undone. I had already filed the patent months ago, long before their plan to push me out had come to fruition. By noon, the effects were starting to ripple through the industry. SkyTech's stock had dropped by 7%, and Precision Tech's stock had surged by 12%. The media was beginning to pick up on the story, and within hours, industry analysts were speculating about what this meant for SkyTech's future. How could the company survive without its flagship technology? But it wasn't just about the stock market anymore. SkyTech was being forced into a corner. They could either negotiate with Precision Tech for a licensing agreement or attempt to rebuild their core technology from scratch, a process that would take years and millions in development costs. The message I had sent to Gregory was simple. This is only the beginning. And it was. By 3 p.m., I received a call from Victor Lawson himself. It was clear from the desperation in his voice that things were escalating quickly. "Luna," he said, practically pleading through the phone. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding. Please, let's talk. We need to work something out." I knew better than to engage in a conversation like that. I simply forwarded the message to Precision Tech's legal team with a brief note. No response until they reach out with a real offer. The fallout was just beginning, and I wasn't about to let them dictate the terms. As I settled into my new role, enjoying the respect I had long been denied, I couldn't help but reflect on the transformation that had taken place. Just a few days ago, I was the one being forced out, seen as replaceable, dismissed without a second thought. Now I was leading a team of brilliant engineers, making decisions that would shape the future of the industry. And SkyTech? They were scrambling to catch up. It felt good to be seen, to finally have the recognition that had eluded me for so long. I had earned it, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me. The next few days were a blur of transition. Meetings, briefings, and the steady rhythm of settling into a new role. I stood in front of my new team at Precision Tech, a group of sharp, eager engineers who were just as ready as I was to leave the past behind and push forward into uncharted territory. Every day felt like a new opportunity to show the industry and myself just what I was capable of when I wasn't being stifled by corporate politics. Meanwhile, across town, SkyTech was spiraling further into chaos. Victor Lawson had not yet accepted the magnitude of his miscalculation. The company was desperate, scrambling to put out fires as the weight of losing its flagship product became undeniable. Miguel kept me updated throughout the week. His texts are reminders of just how far ahead I was, and just how quickly SkyTech was falling apart. By Thursday, it was clear that things were reaching a breaking point. Tech publications had started to run speculative pieces asking whether SkyTech could survive the algorithm crisis. Analysts were noting the severe impact on their Q3 projections, and Victor had become a lightning rod for industry criticism. No one knew how deep the mistake went until it was too late. But what struck me most was the reaction from the employees. Miguel and the others in my old team were getting whispers from SkyTech's staff, rumors that their leadership was preparing to make a public statement. A strategy meeting had been scheduled for the end of the week, and it seemed likely that Victor Lawson would finally have to acknowledge the disaster. I'd been expecting it. What I hadn't expected was how quickly SkyTech's stock would start to plummet. By Friday afternoon, the company's valuation had dropped another 16%, and whispers of mass layoffs were circulating. It was clear to me that they were facing an existential crisis, one that wasn't just about a single algorithm. It was about trust. Trust in leadership, trust in their ability to innovate, and trust in their people. For the first time, I felt a pang of something I hadn't expected: sympathy. Miguel wasn't the only one suffering from this failure. The engineers, the staff, my former colleagues, were caught in the crossfire. They hadn't asked for this, and now they were about to bear the brunt of a leadership mistake that would cost everyone dearly. Still, I couldn't afford to soften my resolve. Precision Tech was counting on me, and I had a responsibility to ensure that we stayed ahead, that we moved quickly, and that we didn't become complacent. The industry's shift was already underway. SkyTech was crumbling beneath its mismanagement, and now it was my time to rise. The following week, things escalated even further. SkyTech's legal team finally reached out. The message was clear. They wanted to negotiate a licensing deal, 3 times the industry standard rate. The irony was not lost on me. The very people who had dismissed me, who had failed to secure the rights to the algorithm I had created, were now begging for a piece of it. I forwarded the message to Precision Tech's legal team with a simple note: don't settle for anything less than a public acknowledgement of my role. They need to understand just how deep they've screwed up. I wasn't going to allow them to walk away from this unscathed. They had taken my contributions for granted for far too long, and now it was time for them to pay the price. Throughout the week, the news kept coming in. SkyTech's stock continued to drop, and their internal meetings only seemed to get more desperate. Victor, in particular, was trying to salvage what little credibility he had left. But it was too late. The industry was watching, and SkyTech's fall from grace was playing out in real time. I focused on my work. At Precision Tech, we were taking the distributed processing algorithm to new heights. The improvements we were making were groundbreaking, far surpassing anything I had done at Skytech. Miguel and the others, now working under my leadership, were free to innovate without the corporate shackles that had held us back before. The contrast was stark. Here, I was recognized. My ideas were valued, not appropriated. Strangely, the satisfaction came not from watching Skytech's demise, but from knowing that finally I was in control of my success. I had worked for this moment, and now it was mine to shape. And then, the final confirmation came. Skytech was in full crisis mode. By the end of the week, they had announced an emergency leadership change. Victor Lawson was stepping down. I couldn't help but smile when I saw the news. It wasn't just about the algorithm anymore. It was about everything. The years of being overlooked, the years of corporate backstabbing, it all culminated in this single moment. Victor was no longer in charge, and Skytech's board had finally realized the cost of their mismanagement. For the first time, I allowed myself to savor the victory. It wasn't about revenge, it was about recognition. Precision tech was thriving, Skytech was floundering, and I was exactly where I belonged. It's funny how quickly things can change. One moment you're dismissed as irrelevant, a casualty of corporate restructuring. Next, you're at the helm of a company that values your contributions and gives you the freedom to shape the future. A little over a week after Victor Lawson's departure from Skytech, the dust had settled, but the shift in the industry was permanent. Precision tech was now the talk of the town, and I was at the center of it all. By Monday morning, I had already seen the first sign of just how much my life had changed. The invitation to speak at the National Technology Innovation Conference had arrived, a keynote. Me. The woman who had once been dismissed without a second glance was now being asked to stand before an audience of industry leaders, sharing my story, my vision, and the work that had revolutionized the tech world. It wasn't just about the algorithm anymore. It was about the industry recognizing that people like me, innovators who had been pushed to the sidelines for too long, had something valuable to offer. I wasn't just the person who created the algorithm. I was a symbol of what happens when people are finally given the credit they deserve. As I stood at the podium, the room filled with tech leaders and journalists, and I took a deep breath. This was it. It had taken years of hard work, frustration, and doubt, but I had finally made it. I looked out at the audience, seeing the faces of women engineers, young developers, and entrepreneurs who were hanging on my every word. I could feel the weight of the moment. This was my chance to leave a mark, not just on the industry but on those who would follow in my footsteps. I began, my voice steady but filled with conviction. Innovation isn't anonymous, I said, the words flowing easily now. It comes from real people, and it's time we recognize that. As I spoke, I shared the story of my journey, how I had been overlooked for years, how I had been told that my work didn't matter. But it did matter. And now, here I was, standing at the front of the room, not hidden in the back as I had been at Skytech, but front and center. The recognition that had eluded me for so long had finally come. The applause that followed was thunderous, and for the first time I truly felt seen. The days that followed were equally rewarding. Skytech, under new leadership, had finally acknowledged my contributions. Their press release, a full week after my keynote, confirmed what the industry had known for days. They had reached an agreement with Precision Tech, licensing my algorithm at an exorbitant rate, with a public acknowledgement of my role as the creator. Their stock had stabilized, though it was clear the damage had been done. The damage to their reputation, to their credibility, was irreversible. Gregory Sullivan called me that evening to congratulate me on the success of the conference. "It's official," he said. "We've got the press, we've got the deals, and now we've got the recognition you deserve." I smiled, leaning back in my chair. "It's not about the press, Gregory. It's about making sure this never happens again. Making sure the next generation of innovators doesn't have to fight for recognition the way I did." Gregory chuckled, his voice warm with approval. "Well, you've certainly set the bar high for them." The next few months passed in a whirlwind. At Precision Tech, my team continued to push the boundaries of what we could achieve with the algorithm. The work we were doing was groundbreaking, and I was finally able to share my full potential with a team that understood and respected the value of my contributions. We released 3 new products, each built on the foundation of the algorithm that had once been stolen from me. Our market share grew, and we quickly became the industry leader. Then, the final confirmation of everything I had worked for came. Precision Tech surpassed Skytech in market valuation. It wasn't just a financial victory. It was the culmination of everything I had fought for: recognition, respect, and ownership of my work. Richard Donovan, the interim CEO at Skytech, reached out to me with a respectful email. The subject line read, "A fair licensing arrangement." It wasn't much, but it was enough. "We've learned an expensive lesson about valuing our innovators," he admitted, "and we'd like to make amends." I forwarded the email to Gregory with a simple message. Phase 1 complete. The terms we had agreed upon were more than fair, but it wasn't just about the licensing agreement. It was about showing the world that when innovators are undervalued, the consequences can be catastrophic. As I sat at my desk at Precision Tech, reviewing quarterly reports, the weight of everything I had accomplished began to settle in. I was no longer the woman pushed to the edge of corporate life, struggling to be recognized. I was now the chief innovation officer at one of the most influential tech companies in the world. My name was attached to the algorithm that had changed an industry, and I had secured a place in history as one of its true pioneers. And yet, as I looked back at the road that had led me here, I realized something profound. It was never about revenge. It was never about getting back at the people who had tried to silence me. It was about recognition, about ensuring that those who create and who innovate are valued for what they bring to the world. It was about showing that the real power lies in ownership. Ownership of your work, your ideas, and your future. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the office, I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. I had finally done it. It seems we've reached the end of the story I was developing. The journey that Luna Davis took, from being dismissed after years of hard work, to reclaiming her intellectual property and rising as a leader in her new company, has come full circle. She's achieved recognition, success, and leadership, making her an icon for others who feel undervalued or overlooked. If you'd like to explore any further twists, character developments, or new angles, feel free to let me know how you'd like the story to continue, or if there's any specific direction you want to take next.